So I have to say, at the beginning of the film, Alex Wheatle, when he first meets his cellmate, this large Rastafarian dude, I was a little nervous. I was having flashbacks of this HBO show called Eyes. Now, anytime a large cellmate meets a younger guy like Alex and they befriend him, something bad happens. And I'm not gonna say what it was, but if you've seen Eyes, you know exactly what I'm talking about. So the first thing when he's like trying to be nice to him, trying to be kind of a father figure, I'm like, Alex, get away from him. Get out of there as soon as possible. Watch out, this dude. You can't trust him. You can't trust him. But thankfully, in the film, nothing like that happened. I'm just going to full disclosure. That's not a big plot point, but it's one of those things. Nothing bad happened like that. But yeah. Even after seeing, I'm like, no, you can't trust him. You gotta watch it back, man. Who knows what happened the next day? But yeah, no, that was. Yeah, that show Eyes, that traumatized me, man. Greetings, everyone. My name is Dr. Jason Freeman. I'd like to welcome you all to my channel. In this video, I'll be reviewing the 4th episode of the Small Acts anthology series titled Alex Wheatle, which is starring Shayi Cole. I'm going to tell you what I liked about the film. I'm going to tell you what I didn't like about the film. Then I'm going to tell you whether I think you should see the film or just skip it. Now, at any point, feel free to click the notification bell or subscribe to my channel to get more content. So, without further ado, let's begin. Now, how would I describe the film Alex Wheatle? Well, basically, it's a fish out of water story about a young guy who goes from foster care to prison. And along the way, he experiences the Brixton riots. Eventually, he becomes a writer and activist, and of course, has a film based on his life, which is part of the Small Acts anthology series. So, pretty interesting life. Now, one thing I wanted to say about the film before I get to the rest of my review is that this is a much darker, grittier film than the other 3 that I've reviewed so far. There's some scenes in there that are just a little bit kind of dirtier, grittier. And so it's not something you want to sit around with your family to watch. Let me just put it that way. Where even with like Mangrove, even though it dealt with police brutality and a pretty sadistic police officer, Lovers Rock has this sexual assault in it. And also Red, White, and Blue has some criminality and things going on in it. This one is just a little bit darker. This is more along the lines of like The Wire or Oz, one of those type of shows. It doesn't quite get to the level of like the kind of sadistic gruesomeness of some of those shows, but it definitely is much darker, much grittier than what we've seen so far from the series. So what do I like about the film? Well, first of all, director Steve McQueen is a master when it comes to telling stories with silence and masterful shots. So a lot of this film is told in that way, similar to what we've seen in some of the previous films as well. So he tells a story with these interesting shots, these close-ups. He holds on characters for a long time to kind of get what's going on with them, both externally and internally as well. And a lot of silence. So people aren't necessarily talking and saying a lot in the moment, but you kind of see the emotion on their faces, you see their body language, you see a lot that tells the story without saying a word. And one in particular, for example, when Alex goes from foster care to, I guess he's kind of aged out. And so he's going to Brixton, which is a predominantly Black Afro-Caribbean community, for the first time in his life being around Black people to that degree, based on what we've seen in the film. He has a smile on his face. You can kind of tell he's like, I'm at home now. I'm no longer in a situation where I'm kind of being victimized and I'm looked at as this animal. They, of course, got the monkey and all that stuff, phrases used against him. And so the first time he feels like he's truly free. And he doesn't say it. He never says it with words, but you can look at his face and see it. And it's something that I think Steve McQueen does masterfully. Another thing I really like was the colorful cast of characters that you see, in particular in Brixton. And so you see these characters who are very diverse, coming from different walks of life. For the most part, I mean, it's all part of this kind of community, but they're very different in many ways. And so it kind of really reminds you that, the Black British community, just like we see in the United States, is pretty diverse. You have people who are Afro-Caribbean, that's their culture, that's, where they're from, that's what they can relate to. And then you have people like Alex, who essentially grew up in Britain. He's British. And so, but still, you kind of see but he still connects with that community as well. So you kind of, it's just interesting to kind of see those connections and kind of see the diversity. And so I love the colorful cast of characters throughout this film. And so it's kind of like, that's one thing I did like about the film, that you did see that kind of diversity among Black people in particular. Of course, not among the white people, and we'll talk about that in a bit. But yeah, definitely wrong among the Black people. There was definitely diversity, and the film definitely had funny parts. That's another thing I like. So there's one part where you have two characters kind of going back and forth, kind of dissing each other or snapping at each other, as we would say in America. And so it was interesting. It was funny to see that in a different culture. I mean, of course, they had a different lingo and a different kind of slang, and it's supposed to be 81, so a different time as well. But it's funny kind of see them going back and kind of snapping on each other. That was pretty funny. And there were also kind of like not the clash, but the interaction between Alex and some of the other people in the community that he meets, because he's British and they're Afro-Caribbean, even though he's Black. Those clashes sometimes are very, very funny.
You is African.
Not. I might be Black, but I'm from Surrey.
It's almost like, who is this guy? Like, what's up with this guy? Think about the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air and Carlton. When Carlton was ever around Will, when he was kind of in a hood situation, Carlton was Alex Wheatle basically, and the guy he was with, I can't think of his name right now, he was Will. He was looking out for him, but he's still kind of like, come on, man, you're embarrassing me. So you had that was actually pretty funny. So I did like that part as well. Now, what didn't I like? Well, so I think about those shots, those amazing shots, and the silence. That's a two-edged sword. So with some of the silence and with the lack of dialogue, there were various times throughout the film, kind of like what happened with Mangrove, I had no idea what was going on. Like, there's no exposition, there's no explanation. You're supposed to really figure it out based on seeing it. And maybe if I was Afro-Caribbean and I was from that community, it might be easier. But my guess is that the majority of people seeing this film are going to be like me. They're not Afro-Caribbean. So when you're looking at these shots, when you're looking at this, you have no idea what's going on. You don't know who that is. You don't know why they're doing it. And it's just very confusing. This is the case in multiple films. And now, so I'll probably kind of put this one more on Steve McQueen, this particular criticism. Again, I love the fact that there were a lot of really good scenes where, again, he focuses on something going on, no dialogue, silence. But then, the 3-4 scenes, and I'm like, I have no idea what's happening. He's not really explaining anything. So I just think there needs to be more balance. Again, I love most of the films. I mean, I definitely love Lovers Rock, which does have, again, a lot of silence, not a lot of exposition. But in this particular film, because it's telling the story of with the Brixton riots, there had to be more explanation somewhere. Not necessarily exposition dump, but some more dialogue, something explaining a little bit more so we kind of have a better feel for what's going on. Another thing I didn't like is that the film is about the Brixton riots, but we don't really see any real run-up to it for like the first 43 minutes of the film. So we're looking at Alex, we meet Alex, we get to know Alex a little bit, Alex, and then at the 43-minute mark, Brixton riots. And I'm like, I know we're in Brixton, they said that, but how do I mean, other than kind of, I guess they did mention a year, so I guess I should have known it based on that alone. But that's the film I'm looking at has nothing to do with the Brixton riots up until the 43-minute mark. And even that, at that point, is not really a lot. You see it, but there's not really any explanation. I mean, they do explain what caused and all that stuff, but it just kind of comes out of nowhere. And so that's the thing. There's no real buildup. There's no foreshadowing anything up until the 43-minute mark of the film. So I think that's one critique I have. Some people may like that. For me, it just felt kind of, it came out of nowhere, and I'm like, okay, so now this is happening. Kind of very disjointed, which is one of my critiques for Mangrove, and the same thing in this particular film as well. Another similarity between this film and Mangrove, which is one of my critiques, is the pontificator. It's not quite as bad as it was in Mangrove, where they're kind of telling these long, elaborate speech. Not exposition, by the way. So that's one thing I want to be clear, that it's not that I'm criticizing them for not using speeches to explain things. You can explain things in just conversation. The point is the speeches are more about these broad social demographic or broad social cultural critiques. So there's a whole thing about Babylon, and there's a whole thing. This is a lot of these kind of big speeches that kind of come out of nowhere to kind of explain, talk about the big picture type things, and it can just lead to an eye roll. So again, it's one of those things. If you're on the middle of the road at all, if you're not familiar with this culture, and these speeches kind of come out of nowhere, and it's like, why? Like why? Like okay, that's fine, that's good. But you tell them, well, I want to know the story. I want to know about this person. I don't need to have to be kind of essentially scolded or essentially kind of talked down to at this point. So that's just one little critique that I have. Just kind of the pontificate. Again, same thing with Mangrove. And I don't want to be too critical of the writer. So Steve McQueen co-wrote all of these, but there's one writer that was in the first Mangrove and in this film, who's not in the middle films, and I feel like I can tell that he wrote those first two, because again, it's the big speeches, it's the political stuff, and it's like this doesn't feel like natural speech. You're telling me your ideology, and I'm supposed to kind of just take it. And again, I agree for the most part. I'm probably not quite as militant as some of the stuff, especially in this one. But the point is, it doesn't add to the story. It just kind of leaves eye rolls and kind of takes me out a bit. Another small critique is the last two films. The music was amazing. I really loved the music in those last two films. Even Mangrove, the music was okay. It wasn't the driving. It wasn't as significant as it was in Lovers Rock and Red, White, and Blue. But the music was amazing in I would say all three films, but in particular the second and the third. And this one, even though he can sing and there's a musical aspect to it, music plays very little role in the film. And what I mean is they talk about reggae and they talk about music. So music is discussed. The music is part of the narrative, but I'm not hearing it as much as I heard it in the last two films. And the thing with the music in the last two films, it really set the atmosphere, which you don't really get from this one. I mean, again, reggae is mentioned, reggae is talked about, but I'm not really hearing a lot of reggae. I'm hearing a lot of talk about reggae, and that doesn't really do anything for me. So again, that's again a small critique. That again, they mention music. Music is part of the narrative, but you don't really hear it. Music's not a big part of the atmosphere, which I think was a big strength of the last two films before this one. And just like the other films, again, another critique, just like the other films, the white characters have zero depth. And the thing is, I love Lovers Rock. I love Red, White, and Blue. But here's my issue with both those films, along with The Mangrove, along with this one, in regards to the white characters. It's not that I want them to ignore the fact there are racist white people. That happens. I mean, that's the reality. We see that in societies around the world, you know. But there are very nice white people. There are white people like my wife who aren't, you know, who don't act like this, who aren't these inhuman monsters, and we don't see them in these films at all. And it annoys me in that, again, I feel like a better story can be told if you give more depth to some of these characters. There's not so a clear, literally black-white situation where all the black characters are the good guys and the white characters are the bad guys. Now, again, we've seen historically where it's been the reverse, where the white characters have been the heroes and amazing, and the black characters are the brutes and the dangerous people and the monsters. I know that happened. Those weren't any good either. But so doing the opposite, flipping it, doesn't make the film better. It just makes it a different version of a bad film. Again, I'm not saying those are bad films, but like a different version of a bad aspect of the films. Which again, I think what I would rather see is is depth and more complicated discussions as to what is causing the situation, so we can eventually fix it. That's the goal. And before people, you know, want to kind of come at me like, oh, you just want to see, you want to be an apologist, or you want white people to be shown in a brighter light. You not want to show reality. Here's my thing with that. Think about Game of Thrones. Think about Game of Thrones here. Game of Thrones is an amazing show, not because it's a clear black-white dichotomy. It's because there's depth to the characters. You have Eddard Stark, the father figure, the main character in Game of Thrones. Well, the first thing he does is these guys see White Walkers. Spoiler alert! Sorry, they see White Walkers. They come and tell him, and he murders them. I think I got his name, Eddard Stark. If I get it wrong, no worries. It's been a while since I've seen that episode. But basically, he kills these guys who were reporting accurately what they saw. And so here's the hero murdering these guys in cold blood. for doing the right thing. And so immediately the hero, all of a sudden, we see there's some issues with him, and you hear about Robert's rebellion, and you hear about some of the stuff that the stuff he did, basically overthrowing the king and all this stuff. And so there's depth to this character. Same thing, even with the Lannisters, and even with some of the quote unquote bad guys. There you see motivations, you see some aspects of them that have some redeemable qualities. Even with Cersei, you see the trauma that she's gone through that has led to some of the things that she does. And so again, that's depth. That's what is lacking from these white characters in all 4 movies so far. I'm guessing it's gonna be the same thing in episode 5. Again, so I'll give that critique again if that's the case. But again, I would love to see more depth, like three-dimensional characters, even ones that are supposed to be villains, but also maybe show some white people who aren't villains. I think it does more for the audience, where essentially it's not this, oh well, this is a propaganda film. It's more so, oh, this is a story about this real kind of situation and what causes it, so we can maybe again come up with some ways to maybe fix it. So again, a small critique. I know it's kind of long, but that's just one of the critiques I had. And one last thing, again, not a critique. Use subtitles if you don't know the lingo from this culture. Again, African American. I grew up in North Carolina. I've heard every kind of Southern accent, so I understand a lot of stuff that probably somebody from somewhere else wouldn't understand, especially with like Reagan and y'all and all this stuff. Like, I grew up with that, so I hear it, so I know what they're saying. And so again, someone was watching a show about Southern people in Great Britain. And they had a hard time understanding, use subtitles. Maybe the subtitles, if you can read it, it makes more sense. That was definitely the case with all 4 movies, and including this one. And that, when I had the subtitles on, I saw the words rather than just hearing them, I wasn't trying to figure out what they were saying. Okay, I see what they're saying. Now, what does that mean? And so there were some interesting things, like kind of slang that I was seeing in the film that I found was interesting. I probably have to watch it again to kind of remember some of it. I think like ramping or something like that was one of them. But it's interesting. I'm learning more about the culture by watching these films. I really enjoyed that part. But it's not a critique. I just put it I want to kind of put it as something at the end of the film, that again, it's just something you have to do in order to, again, coming from a different culture, try to realize what's going on. Now, maybe if I see enough of these films, I'll start to understand things better. It's kind of like your ear gets more attuned to it. But as of right now, having not seen a lot of these films so far, I'm still kind of trying to figure out, and the subtitles do help. Now, should you see it or should you skip it? This is a tough one. Not that it's tough to make the decision. It's tough to say it, only because I've enjoyed this series so much so far that it's tough to be critical of the series, because I think it's important that the series occurred. But I have to be objective here, so skip it. The reason I say skip it is a couple things. One is, I mentioned I do like the colorful cast of characters, which is really interesting. But when it came to the main characters, the ones that I have to follow from the beginning to the end, in particular Alex, he's the main person, I didn't really care for him. And it's not that you have to care for a character in order to enjoy a film, but you have to care about the character on some level, care what happens with them, or at least be interested in what happens with them. And I just don't. Alex, you don't really know a lot about him. He doesn't say very much. And the way that he acts to other people, like, I wouldn't want to hang out with this guy at all. And so I'm glad the film was only 67 minutes, because I only had to hang out with him for 67 minutes. Beyond that, I didn't really enjoy spending time with Alex. And even the guys around him, same thing. Like, I just didn't really enjoy hanging out with them. I enjoyed seeing the diversity of the cast of characters. That's something I did like. But when it came to kind of getting to know and kind of following these characters, I just lost interest pretty quickly. Probably halfway through really from the beginning. But halfway through the film, I'm like, I know I have to finish it. If I'm going to review, I have to finish it. But otherwise, I probably will watch something else at this point, because I'm not enjoying this film. And even when I got to the end, I'm like, didn't really enjoy it. So this is of the four films. This is the one I would just say you can skip it. It's again, if you want to see it. But to me, the thing is film is supposed to be about the Watts, not the Watts, right? The Brixton uprising, and even have the song "Uprising" and that connection there. But you don't really get much of that in there. they have one little snippet, like a documentary section that deals with it, and of course you do see that they talk about what caused and all that stuff, but it's so small that again, by the time you get there, it's like I'm already out with this guy. So oh, they're talking about the bricks and riots. Okay, interesting. And then the movie ends. So it's just like I didn't. There's not enough of that in there to make it worthwhile for me. If you want to know about the bricks and riots, I would say documentary. So I'll be reviewing Uprising in a couple weeks, and so I think that's a documentary. I'm pretty sure it's a documentary on the bricks and riots, and so Uprising, and so yeah, watch a documentary on it. Read this article, a book about it. But this film doesn't really add really anything to it. So yeah, that's just one thing. I didn't enjoy the film. So if you found this review helpful, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. Also, feel free to share this video with anyone you think might find this review helpful or might be interested in watching this film. Thank you all and have a wonderful rest of your day.